What's up, you guys? This is Wayne from Gulf Coast Construction. This is Talking on Top, and I hope you guys enjoy. Just want to give a big shout out to Atlas, one of the main shingles that we sell out here in Texas as well as in Louisiana. They are such a huge help to our success as far as giving us a quality product every single time we put a shingle on a roof. We cannot thank our representatives as far as Renee Marks, Dan and Mark, and all the guys that we deal with when it comes to our services that they provide for us. So if you ever need a roof or you ever need a shingle put on anything in your life, make sure you go with Atlas. All right, boss.
The nitty gritty.
We're in sales.
Yeah.
You're in sales. I'm in sales. We're all in sales. All these people watching are probably in sales.
Yeah.
So when we talk about breaking down a sale, and I've come to really try to break it down as far as like an analytical perspective, and really just try to take little tidbits as far as like, okay, how can I make such a broad topic and really break it down to the little things and to be able to establish a kind of a game plan for people, right? Because I feel like so many people who are trying to get into sales, they don't really know how to go about it. They don't really know how to like start in the middle and then end it, and transition from the first introduction and the initial engagement to the closing aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And I know I trained a lot with you. So in getting into the roofing sales side of it, because we can talk about roofing specific first, what have you come to learn that helps you when it comes to being able to go from point A to point B and getting the success all the way down to that close?
Well, so the transitions throughout the sale are important. Just make sure that you're not, running this race that you can never complete during a sale.
Yeah.
I found myself struggling with that. I've seen other salesmen struggle with actually getting to, hey, let's start this process now. But it comes down to knowing your product and knowing your process, right? So as long as you can kind of say, okay, here's, step A for the process, B, C, and to get all of that started, here's what we got to do, right? Being able to make those transitory statements, I guess is what it is. Yeah. Transitionary, whatever, I don't know the word, but being able to make those transitional statements from A all the way to B to C to D and so on and so forth, and say, okay, now all I need to get this process started is this, right?
Right.
Once they know, the bits of value that they need to know, and not, being overloaded with a ton of information that is useless at that time.
Yep.
Just making sure that they have what they need to know, and then you go from there. But not so much in a scammy sort of way, right? Because one thing that I've known doing sales for a while is like whenever you're trying to sell something to someone, the first idea that they get is, where's this guy trying to scam me? Where's the scam in this whole situation?
Right.
This sounds too good to be true.
Yeah.
Right? And I find that people get that. You dispel that myth, you dispel that ideation faster with the more information that you give them that's needed.
Yeah.
Right? And making it concise and making sure that you deliver it in a confident way.
Yeah.
Because then they know that you know what you're talking about, and you've already assessed and addressed all the pain points.
Right. And what you're referring to is data, as
Right.
far as a universal term that you can wrap that up in. And that was like kind of the first lessons that I kind of broke down to almost everybody within the company is like, hey, there's three main focal points of this sale. You have the open, your introduction, your data, which is your proof of concept, and then your close, which is your moneymaker, right? And you have to know how to go from your open to presenting your data and then being able to close them down with the data you provided. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it is such a pivotal point when it comes to learning how to sell, because you have your data has to be known before you go into that door, right? You have to know your three main points of what you're going to talk about. So you break down those 3 points and you go, okay, you have your open, your data, to close. All right, your open and your close are going to stay the same. You're always going to have an opening conversation, and you're always going to have a closing point that you're going to have to get to. So in that data phase, you have three main focal points that you want to hit on. So for example, right, the three main data points that I would always give you guys is your financial incentives, your financial gain, your incentive of claim, why you want to make the claim, and then your reassurance of your product and your service, right? But then you can even go into more depth as far as the 3 details of that main point, right? So you give 3 details of the financial gain, your premium savings, your deductible limits, your equity restoration on your home, right? And then you can go to your incentive of claim, being in good standing with your insurance, cost free, friendly costs as far as it's not going to cost you anything to make the claim, right? Utilizing your insurance rather than your own personal finances, and then your reassurance of product and service, hands off as far as your process. They're not going to talk to the insurance. You are having the best product as far as the Atlas and why it is the best product, and then making sure you're always going to be on top of that client. Like, you can really go into depth when it comes to understanding and analyzing what you're actually selling. And the best salesman knows his product the best, right? If I go into a house and I know that the guy before me didn't hit on certain points of information, because I'm going to do what's called, you like to say, a needs analysis, right? So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to ask these questions to get that information for me, right? And I'm going to say, okay, well, have you learned about this? Have you been talked to about this? Do you know about this? Have you heard about this? Are you familiar with this, right? And I start asking these questions. Well, if there's something that isn't explained right, or they haven't been educated on right, hey, light bulb, right? Now I know that's what I need to talk about to this homeowner to separate myself from everybody else that they talked to prior. And that's something that I feel like people don't do enough of, asking questions. They do a lot of talking rather than asking. The power of a question has so much more power than a comment, because now when you question somebody, you're questioning their intelligence on the situation that they're in. So if you can provide that knowledge to them that they didn't have prior, now you have the upper hand because you're considered a smarter person than they are. And they're not going to want to deal with somebody that they're smarter than, right? So when you can separate yourself and go, hey, I know more about this than you do, they're going to take a second to listen to you and at least give you the time of day to figure out what you're offering to them. And that's something too, when it comes to, really breaking it down and being analytical about it. You have to know what is the different, because dude, how many guys, we talked about it the other day, like how many roofs do you go to where you talk to the client and they've already talked to 5 or 6 roofers, right? Or you could even go to the sense of like car sales, right? How many people do you know that you go into a car to go buy a car and they've already gone to 7 or 8 other dealerships and talked to other car salesmen about that same vehicle, right? What are you going to do to provide information that they haven't gotten yet? Because that's the only way that you're really going to be able to separate yourself. Because if you're hitting on, like, if you go to a client right now and you talk about financial gain incentives and all that, and then I go in there and give them the same exact pitch, well, they're probably just going to talk to you again because you were the first initial person that they created the relationship with. Right. So you're not really giving yourself that upper hand on the situation at hand right then and there, right? So for sales specifically, you have to break it down more. And I say it all the time. You can't build a house without house plans, right? If you go try to build a house with no plans, you're going to be struggling through that process. And it's the same exact way with the sale. You have to have that strategic plan of how you're going to go in there and what you already know. And I think that's kind of something that a lot of people don't really do, is they don't take the time to master something and really like get it down to almost like a predicated script, per se. And be able, you can be a chameleon, right? You can change it up. You can be in the moment and kind of switch certain things up, but still having that established structure of, hey, I'm going to start this conversation with here. I'm going to ask these certain questions here. And then I'm going to overall get to a point to where I know, hey, now I have the capability of closing.
Right.
And they don't realize that. They don't realize that they can actually train themselves to do that. And in doing that, it's going to create efficiency in those sales, because now you're not going to have to go figure out what you're going to talk about at the door. Like when you're door knocking, you don't want to go knock a door and then as the client's coming up to the door, you're like, okay, I'm going to try to figure out how to talk about this, and I'm going to try to, you know what I mean? Like you're like thinking about like what you're going to talk about.
Right.
No, you need to know as soon as you get there, as you're walking up to the door, you're making that in your head of, hey, I already know what I'm talking about. I already know the points of emphasis that I'm going to bring up, and I'm going to make sure I deliver it in a clear and concise way.
Let me tell you something too. I feel like sales is a dying art right now, because most of what we're talking about has to do with the ability to have a conversation. And you ask questions to get deeper into that conversation. Here's the fact of the matter. We live in this streaming era, and guys are just not even getting out the house. Like, you may be 18 years old and interacted with like 2 girls ever in your life, your mom and your grandma. You know what I mean? So then the ability to have a conversation with somebody that may intimidate you, whether that be girl or guy or whatever the case is, right? It dies off. And if you're not able to have a conversation with somebody and know what you're talking about while just having a regular old conversation, you're not going to be able to sell worth a damn. You know? No, so that's one thing that I think about is like, man, we have a lot of people in our day and age that are just used to, you know, not interpersonal interaction where it's like, you know, just talking and, you know, just regular chopping it up type of deal.
It's like isolation, right? Like so many people like
when you become so isolated.
They isolate themselves, and then it creates like a social insecurity to where they don't know how to talk to people, or they feel like they can't be extroverted in a sense. They have to be introverted, right? So it's like those characteristics I feel like are developed from being like, I feel like the reason why I can talk so much is because I used to always go to the park, and when I was a kid, I moved probably 6 times within the span of 8 years. So I wasn't in like a place where I knew everybody every time. I had to go create friendships. I had to go create relationships. I had to figure out how I could fit in because I was always the outcast. So for me, I learned real quick, that's the only way I'm going to be able to try to be able to like to develop relationships is getting outside of my comfort zone and opening conversations with people that I had no idea who they were or what they liked or how they, you know, how they are outside of the setting that we were in or so on and so forth, you know? And I think that is getting out into the real world and just learning who you are as an individual. Because I feel like so many people talk differently. You don't talk the same way as I do. I think we have a lot of common characteristics, but we both do it in a different way, and we both do it a way that works for us, right?
Right.
Same thing with, you know, I could relate it to Joe, my business partner. He does not sell anything like me. He is very laid back, very calm, very collected, very analytical, informative, and all he does is try to sell with education, right? He doesn't really have that aggressive trait to him, but he doesn't need that because he's so good at relaying the process and relaying the information needed to get someone to close down, right? Whereas with me, I'm all energy. I'm all, hey, trying to shove the paper in their face. I'm being very aggressive. I'm trying to get them to do it right then and there because I know I have the confidence in the way I go to be able to get them to commit to that. So in sales, right, you have to learn who you are and how you sell. But there's common characteristics that kind of are universal as a whole. And what I mean by that is, for example, advancing the sale. Assuming the sale, the little tidbit words that you can say, hey, when I do your roof, rather than if I do your roof, right? Being able to say that one word, psychologically, you don't know how much that impacts the chances of you now getting that roof.
Right.
Because you're putting it into their head like, hey, this is already happening. This is already going to happen. And when it does happen, this is the guy that I'm going to deal with. They don't even realize that. But in your deliverance and in the way that you talk. And dude, there's so many different things that I could break down. The rate of speech, the timing of your speech, right? The timing of what you say and when you say it. There's so many people that like, we could use an example of a guy that works for us right now. He'll go in there and he'll talk a lot, right? And all the stuff that he talks about is very good, but he doesn't do that needs analysis to break down what he actually needs to talk about, right? So he might sit there for 10 minutes and talk to somebody about something that they already know, clear as day, how they feel about it and what they know they need to know. And he just wasted 10 minutes of their time and his time. And now they're probably like, all right, man, you're just telling me the same stuff.
Right. And that has a lot to do with the art of the deal. Right. Now, there's a book out there by the name of The Art of the Deal. I haven't read it yet, but if I had to guess, it has a lot of those principles in there, how to actually have a conversation back and forth. If you think about it right now, the guy who is president of this nation is a businessman.
Right.
How does he go across seas in making these deals with other nations is probably because he's well vetted in making deals with people and having these types of conversations, pushing the envelope forward, making sure that he's actually advancing the deal.
Right.
And so a lot of that's why I say
And aggression.
right.
Because he is aggressive.
Right, for sure. And I think that's why it's so foreign to our generation when we have somebody like that either in office or in a business that is at the head of the business, because we just genuinely do not know how to talk, how to actually have that conversation, and making sure that conversation is not remaining stagnant, but is actually moving forward and getting toward a final resolution.
Yeah, and I took a little quote from Andy Elliott. I watched one of his things, and it was competence equals confidence, right? And I think a big thing with that, and what really struck me, right, is the reason why I'm so confident is because I already know what I'm going to say, and I've said it 1,000 times.
Right.
So it's like me talking to you about personal training. If I sat here and struck up a conversation about personal training, you're going to be in your element. You're going to be able to thrive because you've talked about it so many times and you've gone through the trials and tribulations of failing and succeeding and so on and so forth, right? So that's another thing too, is like you have to get out there and you have to grind and you have to learn from failure. Sales is all about failure. It's all about learning what doesn't work.
Fail fast.
And making it work. You know, you go out there and you're in this industry, you're in this field, and you have all of these different competitors and all of these different guys that do it totally different than you do, right? But what have you found in you analyzing yourself that works for you, right? Because once you close that first deal, now all of a sudden there's like a light bulb that goes off in your head like, hey, I did something that works there, right? And then when you go and you fail a deal, another light bulb should go off in your head going, hey, what did I not do in this deal that I could have sold this deal, right? And then you start doing that time and time and time and time again. And then all of a sudden, you're able to create that. You're able to create that foundation. You're able to create that structure. You're able to create the things to do and the things not to do, right? The things to stay with and the things to stay away from. And that is one thing that I feel like has made me, I would say, better than the common person, is because I am so critical on myself when it comes to when I can't close a deal or when I don't close a deal, like what I did wrong. And I make sure I never do it again. Yeah. Because I know I can sit there and I can remember, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I said this and I know I shouldn't have said it. Or, oh my gosh, I gave them an estimate way too early. I should have waited till I sat down with them and broke down the estimate with them to really give, because when you're giving them like that ambiguity to be able to like make their own self-conscious decision, you lost all the power. Right. You know, when you're able to make them kind of forcefully make that decision based off of what you're delivering to them, and you're able to kind of cut out all of the doubt and cut out all of the ideas that they could make up in their head, now you have all the power in the world. And that goes back to timing, right? But I think it's an uncommon thing that should be taught to people, right? And there is a way to template the way you sell. And there is a way to break down and simplify the act of the sale. And a lot of sales gurus and CEOs and companies that want to develop all these salesmen, they don't take the time to give their people that template. They don't take the time to develop that individually. And what I mean by individually, it's taking the characteristics of that person and being able to know, hey, they're good at talking about this. They're not good at talk about this. So now that you know from your sales experience, okay, I see that. Now give them the route to success as far as, hey, let's stay away from this conversation. Let's not talk about this. You're very good at talking about this. Let's try to stick to that. Let's stick to that script, and let's fill them in on this stuff. You know, and that's something that I think is universal, man. I think everybody should take the time to really break down what that sale is and what those key points are, so that way you know exactly what you're going into that situation and talking about.
Well, let me back you on that, because here's one thing that I think about sales. If you are a person that aspires to do well for yourself, period, not having to work for somebody for the rest of your life. Maybe, getting into the market with a product that you really believe in. Learn how to sell things. Because if you learn how to sell things, now all of a sudden you have bought your freedom into the market.
Right.
Of being able to sell whatever it is that you sell. Now it's just about figuring out what it is that needs to be sold, how to fill a gap in whatever market that you want to be in.
Right.
But essentially what we're talking about is getting that 10,000 hours of practice, fail fast so you can figure out what works and what doesn't work. And the better you figure out what works and what doesn't work, now all of a sudden you have bought your financial freedom. You may not have realized it yet, as far as like from monetarily, as far as value is concerned in your bank account.
Right.
But you always have the potential to keep yourself afloat by being able to sell things.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying I just trip out so much with people that are in our generation and the generation below us, because man, it's like, if y'all don't figure out how to talk to people, how are you going to figure out how to sell things? How are you not going to end up, just working for me one day for the rest of your life, because you haven't figured out how to penetrate this market and actually sell not only yourself, but sell the product as well.
And a lot of people are worried about the money, but the money is temporary. The skills last forever.
Right.
And that's something that I feel like is so important when you go into a different sales venture. Is it doesn't matter if you're selling pest control, it doesn't matter if you're selling roofing, it doesn't matter if you're selling solar, it doesn't matter what you're selling.
Freaking power washing.
If you are developing the skills to know what you are supposed to do in that act of a sale, right? The data and the information can be whatever it is, because every product's going to have its key points, its benefits, its disadvantages, its advantages, all that good stuff, right? But it's knowing how to formulate that into a conversation, like you say, and be able to deliver it in a simplified manner that's almost dumbified to someone that doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, right? And that's another thing too. You have to know who you're talking to, and that's, you talk about good traits of a salesman, right? Being able to analyze the situation and knowing what you're stepping into and knowing who you're talking to, right? Because if you're dealing with somebody, let's just bring up roofing, for example. If I'm talking to somebody that's been through the claim process 3 times and they've dealt with 3 different roofers and they already know everything about it, why in the heck am I going to sit there and try to break down everything about the process? There's no reason I should.
Or you can run into a situation like what I did, just a little example, story time real quick, right?
Yeah.
When I was not necessarily starting off, I was probably about 6 to 7 weeks into the business, right? I ran into this older gentleman that had already been through, several contracting projects. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a contractor himself. He knew a lot about roofs. And come to find out, I'm trying to sell him a roof, and he knows more about roofs than I do at the time. And so that kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I realized that, man, it was scary, because I'm like, holy crap, I'm not going to be able to sell this. I powered through. I tried it, right? But when it all came down to it, he's like, yeah, just give me the brochure and I'll figure it out.
And you didn't close the deal.
Didn't close the deal, because I didn't know more than that guy, and I didn't understand who I was talking to.
But from that, right, you learn now, hey, I need to vet this guy a little more before I dip into something, right? Because if you're, like you did, probably going in there, not really having a solidified structure yet and just trying to go in there and deliver a bunch of information that sounds good, now you're not getting the information back from him to really know how to nail that nail in the coffin.
There you go.
Right? And you as an individual, being able to adapt and learn from that is a quality in itself, because now you can take that failure and turn it into 5 different successes down the line, right? And I think as far as the confidence, the deliverance, the timing, all of that, right? We can talk about all of those quality traits of a good salesman. But when it all boils down to, the best quality you can have as a salesman is knowing yourself and knowing how you sell. Because if you, like, let's just say, for example, we talked about isolation, right? If you're an introverted guy and you're isolated and you never talk to anybody, well, then I'm not going to lie, sales is probably not for you, because you're not going to be that person that can sit there and truly generate a conversation out of the mud and be able to flow the way that you should. sales is all about flow. Sales is all about rhythm. Sales is all about being able to just seamlessly go through a conversation and not have any hitch-ups, right? Being able to answer any question that you could ever think of for that client to make sure when you walk out of that door, there's not a doubt in their mind after you leave that table, right? Because there's some times where I have been shadowing guys, right? And I've held myself from saying stuff, and I've actually allowed us to walk out of the door, and I'll go to that guy and I'll say, hey, do you think that you've answered all of the questions for that client? And they'll be like, yeah. I'll be like, okay, well, let me ask you a question. And I'll ask him the question that I pretty much think that that client's asking themselves in the head as we're walking out, right? And then they go, oh man, I should have definitely hit on that. Right. And it's like, okay, so if I'm able to sit here and ask you the same question, you didn't do your job. You didn't close them down the way that you thought you did. Even though you think, oh, I got, you know how many times I've walked out the door, oh man, I got him. Yeah. Never hear from that person again. Right. And that's because I didn't take the time to really answer every single possible question that could arise. Right. And I didn't truly separate myself from every other person that walked in that door after me. Right. So that's just a testament to your development as a salesman, your training as a salesman. You have to be able to know how to really just check every box on that breakdown when it comes to all of the because for example, when you first started out, you worked for say 2-3 weeks, right? You got to ask some questions. Okay. 2 months from now, you probably got to ask some more questions. 2 months from then, you probably got to ask some more questions that you didn't even know about. Right? That people's minds just start wondering and you start thinking and you're like, damn, I never really answered that. Okay, here, this is how I answer it, right? So now, as you go through that developmental phase of you being a salesman, you kind of add all of that to your artillery as far as your tool belt of success. And you're able to really break it down and go, okay, no matter what question is asked to me, I'm going to have an answer. And that answer is going to be so good that they're not going to ever ask that question again. Right? And I think it's paramount that people take the time to, and this is why I tell people to record themselves. And I think it's such a foreign thing to people sometimes that they don't record themselves, because it's like, how are you going to remember that whole entire conversation? Like you won't. I don't care how, if you go knock 50 doors and you talk to 15 people or whatever it is, you're not going to remember all 15 of those conversations and how they went. So you have to collect some data, some documentation of yourself, analyze it, break it down, be critical to yourself, and truly master your craft. Like you said, it's practice. But the only way you can practice is if you know what you need to work on. There's a difference between practice and perfect practice. And my coach used to always talk about this. If you're not practicing perfect, you're not practicing at all. Because you're just practicing habits that aren't going to lead you to success. So you have to perfect your craft, and in doing that, you have to perfect your practice. And that's something that I didn't really understand growing up. And I look back at my football film all the time, and I'm like so critical on myself, because I'm like, man, if I would have just step hinged on my hip the right way, I would have been able to make that throw. Or, hey, if I would have just looked off that safety a little bit longer, I wouldn't have threw that interception, right? And now that I'm older, I have that mindset, and I can look at things and I can go, okay, yeah, this is where I went wrong. But being young and not really knowing that, it was very difficult for me to apply that, you know? So now that I am older and that I am kind of, you know, more vetted in this industry and just more vetted in sales in general, I'm so analytical, bro, on myself. And I think that is why I'm able to be analytical on other individuals, because I've taken the time to really break down myself. And that's you know, something as far as like everybody who wants to be in sales, right? They don't want to just be an average salesman, right? They want to be the guy. They want to be the best salesman in the business, who can probably train other salesmen, or who people look up to be like them, or just whatever the case may be. If you have that entrepreneurial mindset, if you have that, I want to be the best mindset, right? Eat what you kill kind of thing. But the only way you can really be that is if you dissect yourself to a T and really break down all of the negative aspects of yourself. Like, all right, let me ask you this. If you could tell me 3 things right now that you could work on? I guarantee you could give me 3 characteristics.
I've been thinking about them actually.
Right.
Yeah.
What are 3 characteristics that you can work on?
So the first thing is getting ahead of the questions. I witnessed you do this last week, right? So there was a question that came up in a lady's mind, and I noticed some weird voodoo stuff because I was like, you literally just told this lady what she was about to ask before she asked it.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a great way to establish yourself as the authority, right? And just authority meaning like the person that
Controlling the conversation.
Exactly,
Correct.
controlling the conversation. Another thing is rate of speech, right? Because I noticed some of my closes, like take for example a gentleman that may know a little bit more about construction than me, right? Well, all of a sudden that makes me a little nervous, right? So now I'm trying to get my words in as fast as possible before he asks the next question.
Which really you should slow down and you should really break it down like, okay, what does this guy know and what does he do? What doesn't he know?
And ask more questions. Right. And so that kind of brings me into my third point, which is exactly that. Just making sure that I'm asking all the questions that I need to, not just having a conversation with nothing but questions, because that gets annoying after a while.
Correct.
But just gathering as much information as I possibly can, retaining that information, and coming back and saying, okay, this is what I need to build my close on.
Right.
Point X, Y, and Z that, Mr. John brought up.
Yeah.
Because if I can do that, then I can make sure that I address everything that he brought up. And now I know that he's confident in going with me versus, the other 10 roofers that came by.
And you talked about it earlier, right? The transition of the sale. I think the transitions of the sale are so important because as an individual, you have to know when to take it to that next phase of the sale, right? If you like break down the sale on a spectrum, right? You're like, and I guess you could say the 3 points that I talked about with the open, the data, and the close. But you could even say like, all right, your open engagement, your 3 points of emphasis, your kind of set the hook pace as far as like how you're going to get them to the point of close. And then once you set the hook, how to pull the line in and get them to where they're signing that deal up, right? You kind of have to know like, okay, this is my main point that I'm going to leave to the end. And that's going to be my cliffhanger, right? That's going to be the way that I get them to really roll in, right? And that may change, right? Just like you said. You got a guy who knows all about construction. So that cliffhanger for the guy who didn't know anything, you might talk to them about product as your cliffhanger and be like how you have the best roof and how you have the best shingle. But this guy already knows everything about shingles. So you can't go end your sale off like that because he's just going to be like, well, dude, you just told me everything that I know. So what was the point of that, right?
Right.
So your success goes way down as far as the percentage of your success because you didn't take the time to look at all of those different details.
Right.
So, in sales and in this industry, you have to understand that as a salesman, there are different ways that you can contribute to your own success. And there's different ways that you can break down your own talent to truly convert that to success in the field, right? You can do those little things, and it goes back to lifestyle, right? Being able to take those little tidbit things and applying them to your lifestyle. And let me ask you this. How important is it for you as a salesman, not as a manager, as a salesman, how important is it for you to be confident in yourself?
It's probably, if not the most important thing, is definitely top 3. Because if I tell salesmen like this all the time, I'm coming out in that neighborhood and I'm walking around like I own the place.
Exactly.
Because if I don't do that, homeowners are going to be able to read that fresh. As soon as you come up to the door, if you feel not confident about anything that you're pitching, why would that homeowner be confident in going with you versus somebody else, that has a better price maybe or something like that? So just, I think it's of utmost importance to make sure that you are confident in yourself, in what you're doing. And I think that has a lot to do with believing in what you're selling and making sure that you know your product thoroughly.
And your presentation and everything, right?
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, man, that's just such a testament to, what I believe in. And that's if you believe you're the best, you are the best. And if you feel like you're the best, you're going to be the best. And every single day, you just have to work on yourself and you have to work on the things that are going to truly make you successful as an individual and be able to master your craft, right? And in mastering your craft, being able to take all of the things that you're probably not paying attention to right now, but hopefully after you listen to this, you'll start to pay attention to those things, right? And being able to take those things down one day at a time, and really just starting to separate, okay, hey, this is what doesn't work for me and this is what does work for me. And once you learn that, I think you'll see the results that you want to see over time. And just so you guys understand, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the next day. It's going to take days, weeks, months, years of practice, years of experience, years of hard work and dedication to truly develop yourself into the overall end phase of what you want to be, right? If you want to be Thanos, well, Thanos didn't become Thanos day one. You know what I mean? He had to work towards that. And that's something where you have to, if you want to reach your end evolution of whoever you are, there's going to be growth phases in that time of you getting to that end result. So you don't just love the end result. You love the route and the journey getting there. And don't be focused on the end result. Be focused and appreciate the grind and appreciate the time that it takes to get there, because once you get there, it's done with. And then you have nothing to look forward to. So appreciate every single day and moving forward and being a part of excellence, being a part of greatness and striving towards that, and soak in every single day and opportunity that you have to do that, because once it's over, it's over. And we have a short life that we live, and we have a lot of things that we tend to just kind of skate by, just trying to live this fast-paced life, because sales is a fast-paced life, right? And we tend to overlook these little, like I like to call them crowns that we have in our life, as far as just blossoming moments where we've overcome triumphs, where we've overcome tribulations in our life, to where it's like, man, I did it. I worked on it, and I found a way to make it work. So enjoy the grind, enjoy the journey, and enjoy every single day in doing this. And if you're not enjoying it, find a new hobby, find a new career, because this is a badass career, and you'll love it every single day if you do it the right way. So this is talking on top, and we'll talk to you guys soon.